from a sedentary to a physically active societal way of life. This is Up on Our Feet.
Welcome to Up on Our Feet. Just over a century ago, when it was first introduced in America, it was quite controversial. Some claimed it was religious indoctrination disguised as a way to be physically healthy and fit. Others claimed its philosophy was a conspiracy to undermine the nation, and still others said it was outright blasphemous. Today, it's reportedly practiced by tens of millions of Americans in studios and homes in every state across the country, in cities and towns large and small, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Worldwide, it's claimed to be practiced by more than 300 million people. What is this health and fitness practice that continues to grow here in America and around the globe? It's yoga. And someone who has conducted extensive research on yoga is Professor Neha Gothe, the director of the Exercise Psychology Lab at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The lab explores the biopsychosocial health benefits of physical activity across the lifespan, including Professor Gothe's particular focus on non-traditional modes of physical activity, such as yoga. Professor Gothe is also a member of the American Sports Institute's International Board of Advisors. Professor Gothe, it's nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Okay, so while most people have a general idea of what yoga is, would you please define it for us and describe what's its intended purpose?
Sure. So as you mentioned rightly in your introduction, it is a centuries-old tradition of practice. If you look at the historical scriptures and ancient Indian philosophy, yoga is often referred to as a holistic practice. It's a lifestyle practice. So you have the mind, the body, the soul. There are specific movements, postures, breathing, meditation, mindfulness. It's a way of life. It's often described as a way of life in those philosophical scriptures. Largely over the years, especially I would say over the past 2 decades or so, the focus on yoga has really come into light as it has become more and more popular outside of India, where it was developed, especially in the Western cultures. And now here in the US, the National Institutes of Health, they define complementary and alternative medicine, which is considered this diverse group of healthcare systems, practices, and products. So yoga is now part of that in complementary and alternative medicine practices. So it can be used as a practice as an adjunct to therapies, as an adjunct to medicine and health. And so my research really tries to uncover some of those benefits that might have been documented.
Okay, and as I understand it, there are different types of yoga. Would you describe what these different types are?
Sure. So considered historically, yoga has 8 components. It's often described as a tree with 8 limbs, right? It's metaphorical. So those 8 things are ethics, universal ethics, individual ethics, physical movements or postures, which are most common and what people know most yoga for. So those are those physical exercises. You have breath control, which is referred to as pranayam or breathing exercises. There is control of the senses, which is pratyahara, which is again just awareness in a way, control of your senses. There is dharana, which is concentration, and dhyana, which is meditation. And finally, the 8th limb is considered samadhi or bliss. So if you look at the historical writings in yoga, they talk about each of these 8 practices and how they should be embedded into one's lifestyle. But by and large, what we know in the US and what has been examined in the Western cultures and in the context of yoga and treating yoga as exercise are these different styles of yoga that have evolved. The most popular is Hatha Yoga. So if you were to go sign up for a yoga class in your community, wherever you live in the US, I would say 99% of the times it is going to be a hatha yoga class. And what that basically means is about 80% of the class is going to focus on making your body move, making you exercise. About 20% of the class is going to focus on breathing exercises, on some mindfulness and meditation exercises. And that's the combination that's been practiced. There are definitely styles of yoga that weigh one practice more than other. So there are styles where the practice would involve heavily meditative exercises. So you're either seated or lying down and focused on body scanning, just watching your thoughts come and go. So it's all about meditation or being mindful. There are those types of yoga then focus less on the physical movement or the physical postures. On the extreme, you have yoga styles like flow yoga or vinyasa yoga, which are more heavily on the physical side of things. You might actually get a really good workout after attending one of those classes. It will get your heart rate going. You might sweat a little bit. So there is a range in the styles that are practiced, and that range really comes about from what is the pace of the class, how fast or slow are you practicing those movements, and how much of the breathing, meditation, mindfulness are you incorporating into those movements.
Okay, so it's a pretty, from what you're saying, it's a very comprehensive. It isn't just physical activities and breathing. There's a whole dimension
Absolutely.
to all these types of yoga.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's a way of life. It's considered to be a philosophy. So it's not just about moving your body or letting your mind rest or just taking some time out for yourself and your spirit, but really it is about how you conduct yourself personally and in the space of this social society that we live in. So it's like I mentioned, you have ethics that are part of yoga practice. And then, of course, there are personal practices like the breathing, meditation, mindfulness that are also incorporated into it.
Okay. All right. So tell you what, let's look at both the physical and mental or cognitive benefits of practicing yoga. And let's start with the physical benefits first, if you would. What are those benefits physically?
Yeah, so the research on yoga is fairly nascent. So I would say if you are to look at any of the research databases, the spike in research and evidence for yoga really came about in the early 2000s. So I would say no more than probably the last 20 to 22 years is where we see much of the science pertaining to what does yoga really do to our bodies, be it physically or mentally. On the physical side, there is good evidence suggesting yoga can help improve balance, which is not surprising. If you've seen some of the yoga movements, postures, there are definitely components where you are trying to stand on one leg, for example, in the tree pose, where you have your arms above your head and your feet. You're trying to balance on one side of your body and then alternate between the other two sides of the body. So balance is something that there is good evidence where yoga can improve balance with regular practice. There's also some evidence for flexibility and mobility of the body, or strength of the body, so to speak. So collectively, these components are referred to as functional fitness, or the body's capacity to be able to do your day-to-day tasks. And so having that balance, flexibility, mobility, strength. And yoga has shown to improve each of those aspects. Of course, much of these studies in science comes from studying yoga for middle-aged and older adults, where we know these things are more important to preserve as we age. And so a lot of the science and evidence for yoga and how it can improve balance, mobility, strength, or flexibility does stem from studies that have examined yoga for older adults. There is also some good evidence for yoga that can help with managing lower back pain or chronic pain and pain management. And we know with the opioid epidemic and overuse of or substance use disorders that exist with opioid use, there is definitely some merit there to explore the potential for yoga to mitigate or help manage chronic pain and chronic lower back pain. So there have been some strong randomized controlled trials done, large scale studies. They have looked at veteran populations who are more susceptible to pain and chronic pain. And they have noticed that yoga is quite potent in helping those individuals manage that pain. So physically, there is definitely merit in looking at yoga for body functioning or activities of daily living and how it can promote those activities successfully. Yoga is now also recognized as one of those muscle strengthening activities by the CDC. We know there are now prescriptions and guidelines for Americans as to what and how much exercise should we be engaging in across the lifespan. And yoga is considered as one of those muscle strengthening activities. So when you're performing yoga, you're not necessarily using a weight or resistance bands or dumbbells like you would in a gym, but you're pretty much using your own body weight to do certain yoga poses. You might be on your hands and feet if you're doing the classic down dog position. Your arms are on the floor, your legs are on the floor, and you're supporting your body with your arms and legs. So you are using your body as a weight, as a resistance to really build that muscle and build the strength. And the CDC recognizes that, and it's rightly so categorizing yoga as a form of muscle strengthening activities.
Okay. All right. So that's what happens to us physically when we practice yoga. Can you tell us how this happens? Meaning, what's the biological or physiological explanation of how people end up enjoying these physical benefits when practicing yoga? What goes on at those levels?
Yeah, so we don't have as much evidence at the molecular level as much as we do for other forms of exercise that have been around for a longer time. For example, aerobic forms of exercise, running, jogging, walking, or even resistance training, where typically studies have been done looking at what happens in the muscle after you lift weights or examples of those nature. With yoga, what we do know is if you consider it, and which it is, a form of muscle strengthening activities, you would expect that yoga would have similar changes at a physiological level as you would see with a traditional strength training activity. Because you're again engaging the same muscles for certain movements. So whatever benefits and whatever muscular changes, biological changes, molecular changes that are taking place by performing or engaging a certain muscle group would be the same as you would see within resistance training activities.
Okay. So that's the physical part. Now, how does yoga impact the brain and cognition? What do your research studies and those of others say about this?
Yeah, so collectively, studying yoga for mental health has definitely been more popular in research. And again, it's probably the mindfulness, meditation, relaxation pieces that really draw researchers to that question as to what is it about yoga that really makes us feel calm and composed and relaxed or very centered after a particular practice. Maybe either temporarily or long term, it might help alleviate some of that anxiety that you might feel in the moment. So there have been studies done across the lifespan. There have been studies done with individuals who have clinical conditions for mental health, such as depression or diagnosed anxiety disorders or stress disorders, such as PTSD. And yoga has shown to improve symptoms for those individuals who exhibit clinical levels of mental health conditions. Excuse me. With cognition, which is my specific area of expertise, we have also seen yoga benefits for cognitive health. We know that during yoga practice, you are performing this exercise and a combination of breathing and mindfulness, and collectively, those things can impact certain areas in the brain that are involved with meditation, mindfulness practice. We have done some studies in our lab looking at pre and post effects of yoga practice on behavioral tests of cognition. So participants are completing some paper pencil measurements or are being interviewed by a psychologist to assess their cognitive health. And we see that their health improves over time as they practice yoga. And again, these studies are done with middle-aged and older adults who are more susceptible to those changes and declines in cognitive health. In terms of imaging, we have also tried to scan individuals who have been doing yoga for a long time and compare their brains with those who haven't done yoga before. And we see that those individuals who have practiced yoga for many years, and in our studies, usually it's between 8 to 9 years of yoga practice, we see those individuals have improved brain functioning. There are certain regions in the brain, such as their hippocampus, which are larger compared to those individuals who don't practice yoga regularly. So there is definitely some merit in long-term as well as immediate or short-term practice of yoga.
Okay, and you just mentioned the impact of yoga on the hippocampus. Does this mean then there's a possible benefit to practicing yoga that improves executive functions, especially working memory, cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control? Is there anything about that?
Absolutely. Those are, in fact, the regions that some of the research studies highlight. And that could be, we don't know exactly the mechanisms yet because those studies are still very nascent. In fact, in our research lab, we have one of the first largest trials trying to examine or uncover those mechanisms underlying that yoga practice and executive functioning effects. But the hypothesis here is that when you are performing yoga as a form of exercise, you are not just moving your body. You are aware of your body in space. You are focused internally on your breath. You are focused on doing some mindfulness meditation practice as part of the yoga class. So it's quite different from engaging in other forms of physical activity where you could still be thinking about something else during the day that you need to do, whereas your body might be exercising. A good example would be you might be in a gym where you're watching television in front of you and running on a treadmill at the same time. And that's not something that you see with yoga. If you're really practicing yoga the right way, you are focused mentally on your body during the practice or during that entire exercise session. And that engagement of your mind and body is what we speculate is leading to those executive functioning, higher order effects. There is definitely evidence for yoga with improving certain inflammatory markers, for example, stress and anxiety. There have been studies looking at how yoga can lower your cortisol, which is an easy marker or a protein that can be detected in saliva or blood. And it's a strong marker of stress that our body faces. And so it's possible that with continued yoga practice, you see lower levels of cortisol and body stress, which in turn help improve our memory, executive functioning. There is a wealth of research that points towards how high stress is really bad for your brain. And so having yoga as a means to modulate that stress can then lead to positive changes to your brain health.
Okay. So a short while ago, you were talking about, you were comparing yoga to certain kinds of other physical activities. And you mentioned in particular aerobic activity. Is there research that shows the cognitive benefits of practicing yoga as compared to the benefits of these other physical activity practices that are aerobic, like jogging, swimming, cycling, things like this?
Not really. So no well-powered studies, and that's exactly what we are doing in our lab at this moment in time. We are in the middle. We have done 3 years of work and we have 2 more years of work to do on this particular project. And we are actually asking that exact question. How does yoga practice compare to aerobic exercise? How does it compare to traditional stretching and toning, muscle strengthening exercises? And what impacts do we see on brain health and some of these inflammatory markers that I talked about with cortisol and stress? So we are conducting that particular trial right now where we can make direct comparisons across those 3 conditions. We are working with a group of middle-aged and older adults who will participate in one of the 3 conditions. And these individuals are completing an extensive neuropsychological battery for us that assesses memory, attention, executive functioning. They're also completing a brain scan for us, an MRI of the brain, so we can actually look at which areas and regions of the brain are getting impacted by these different types of practices. And they're going to be engaging in exercise for 6 months. So it's really helping us look at those long-term changes in these individuals who are middle to older adults. We also have a 12-month follow-up. So we are also trying to determine whether there are any positive changes in the first 6 months of the program and whether those changes are maintained over time. So I think that project is really going to help us answer some of those unique questions. There is some evidence in the context of acute exercises. And by acute, we mean an immediate effect of yoga on brain health or emotional health. Excuse me. Those studies have looked at a 20-minute yoga program and its effect immediately after on brain health and cognitive health. And the same individuals are brought back to a laboratory setting and they're made to practice, say, a 20-minute walking program or a 20-minute running program and compare those effects again on cognitive health. And in those types of acute studies or single bout exercise studies, we have seen yoga to actually be superior to aerobic exercise. And so there is some promise there for sure in terms of how yoga can possibly affect our mental health as well as more specifically our cognitive health.
Okay. So there's a lot that we know about yoga. There's a lot of studies that are going on to learn about yoga. Have you ever thought about or possibly even researched what it is about yoga overall that makes it so compelling for so many people? I mean, I've read where here in America, a little more than 1 in 10 people practice it. I mean, those are huge numbers.
Yeah.
And it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And you've articulated all these things. But have you ever stepped back and wondered what it is on a comprehensive level that makes it so compelling?
Yeah, we actually ask that question a lot with all our research studies and projects. When we advertise a new study that is going to look at yoga and its effects on physical or mental health, when individuals come volunteer for our projects, we often ask them what made them come and volunteer for our project. Oftentimes it's their curiosity about yoga. They have heard about it a lot. They have seen it a lot in social media and popular media. They know a lot of celebrities who practice it. And they're wanting to give it a chance and wanting to give it a try. And they trust somebody like an academic researcher to provide them with that evidence-based practice. And so we often see just curiosity about the practice. But when we interview these individuals after they have participated in the program with us, what they tell us is what they loved about it was its flexibility and modifiable nature. And again, I should preface that we often work with individuals who are middle-aged and older adults. So these are individuals who have a number of chronic conditions, health conditions. They may or may not have the best of physical health, oftentimes age-related chronic conditions such as arthritis, pain in joints and knees. And these are individuals who are not really up for walking around every day because it hurts their knees. They are individuals who are not particularly fond of going to the gym and lifting weights because they are worried that they might injure themselves. And what yoga does in this context is really offers them a safe space to move. It is very gentle on the body for somebody who may have chronic conditions or disabilities. It is very modifiable. Pretty much every yoga pose or exercise can be modified based on your fitness, flexibility, balance, and overall physical health. And so if you have the right instructor who is well trained, who can really coach you and walk you through a practice of yoga that your body is able to tolerate, then that makes it a really appealing practice for this group of individuals. In our studies with younger populations, and we have done some of those acute exercise, like I said, a single bout of yoga and its effects on mental health, those studies with college age students. And we actually hear the same thing from college students too. Not every student is fond of running on a treadmill in their university gym. And so they are looking for ways that they can practice something that gives them a timeout. They are able to focus on themselves, their breath, their body. They're just able to relax for a little bit. It takes the edge off, the stress and anxiety off. And that's often appealing to those college students for practice. So I believe depending on the age range and the physical status of the individuals who practice it, I think there are unique things about the practice that really attract them to come and try yoga or engage in a regular yoga practice. There are also a number of free yoga practice platforms that are now quite widely available. There are a number of apps on both the Apple as well as the Android markets on smartphones. There are some resources that are offered through the CDC and NIH. So there are places that people can go and try yoga and see if it is something that they enjoy or it is something that their body will enjoy and tolerate. And oftentimes, if they see immediate benefits, if they feel like, oh, that session felt good, I was able to really relax and calm down. I can feel it, right? If you can really feel those immediate effects, then that draws those individuals back to that practice over and over again. So I only see the practice getting more and more popular, especially, like I said, with those individuals who have physical limitations that prevent them from practicing other forms of exercise.
Okay, so given all of this, all the things you just mentioned, which are extensive, where do you think the overall practice of yoga is headed? What's its future?
I think there is so much to uncover, and I think with more and more yoga training and institutes that are offering extensive yoga training, not just in the three pieces that have become most popular, like I said, with Hatha Yoga, the movement, the breathing, and the meditation. But like I said, it's a way of life, and more people are diving a little bit more into that philosophy of yoga. What does it mean to really have this holistic practice that is not just on the mat, but also off the mat during yoga and in your life? And I think one way that the field is moving forward is to really encompass and implement that holistic practice in this day and age, where a lot of us are glued to a screen for most of our days. So really taking the time out to be a good social human being, as well as taking care of your body, mind, and spirit. There is also a push on yoga towards identifying a more cost-effective ways to bring this practice to more and more people in the community. Even to this day, yoga classes can be quite expensive. If you are, especially in certain cities or more metropolitan areas, attending a yoga class can be anywhere between $10 a class through possibly even $50 a class, depending on how well reputed that studio or the yoga studio or the instructor is. And so one of the things that the researchers in the space are moving towards is making yoga cost effective and something that everybody can really take on, regardless of their income, regardless of their social status or economic status. And so I think there will be more and more yoga practices that are freely and widely available for individuals to try and practice. There is also a push towards really uncovering those mechanisms. Like some of the questions that you alluded to earlier was, what happens to the body when you're doing yoga? What happens to the brain exactly when you're doing yoga? And I think with a number of advances in technology, especially with brain imaging and EEG and ERPs, we are able to really look at what happens in the moment when you're practicing yoga. And then, of course, what can happen with long-term practice, like 6 months or a year-long practice of yoga. So I think that technology will also help us really answer and uncover those mechanistic pathways and understanding of the practice.
Okay. Final question. Over the course of your entire professional career, And with all the studies you've done regarding how physical activity, including yoga, impacts human beings, in the big picture of things, what's the big message, the big takeaway, the major conclusion you've come to?
I think what I would say is just move your body in the way you feel comfortable doing it. It could be in the form of yoga, or it could be in the form of any other style of exercise or movement. It could be something that is more culturally relevant to your race or ethnicity. But it's just about moving your body. And if you can do that, and if you can keep up with that, I think you can live a really long and healthy life.
Okay, well said. Professor Neha Gothe of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, thanks for being with us on Up on Our Feet.
Thank you so much for having me, Joel.